Welcome to another episode of MoTorque, the show where we bring you cars, bikes, action, adventure, motorsports, and anything to do with torque. On tonight's episode, we test drive the brand new Volkswagen Passat. We look at the only classic Aston Martin in Sri Lanka. And highlights from the Sigiriya Rallycross.
For over a decade, the Volkswagen Passat has been the standard by which mid-sized executive saloons are judged in the European market, because of its premium feel, sorted dynamics and all-round practicality. In Sri Lanka though, the Passat is more of a niche player thanks to our obsession with the Japanese. But for those in the know, it has always been a solid alternative. Today we've got the keys to the latest iteration of the Passat, the B7, which is a total refresh of the platform that has been around since 2005. So yes, it is getting on a little bit. But you can't tell by looking at it though. It is styling wise bang on up to date. You've got the big lights and the prominent grille with the huge Volkswagen logo out front. You've got crisp lines throughout the car and a high tail with large tail lights, all of which is reminiscent of their flagship Phaeton. In fact, that's probably the best sum up for the styling of this Passat. It looks like a 75% scale Phaeton limousine. Inside, the dash is practically unchanged from the B6 model, except for some material tweaks here and there to increase the premium feel, so Volkswagen says. It's a very nice place to be, this interior. Lots of light, really well put together, and a control layout that is the model of Germanic logic and clarity. When you're on the move, the sense of solidity is reinforced, with not even the smallest rattle, squeak or ill-fitting piece of trim to detract from the quality impression. The driver's seat is firm and very supportive. A wide range of adjustment coupled to a tilting and telescoping wheel makes getting comfortable behind the wheel really easy indeed. When you're settled in, the controls are really well laid out and fall nicely to hand, visibility is extremely good, and it really feels like a cockpit that is focused around the driver. The only major negative of the Passat is a shortage of space in the rear. When the front seat is set for a taller driver, the rear passenger finds their legs quite close to the front seat back, something that's pretty strange in a car this size. In every other aspect, the Passat is the model of practicality, however. Massive, and I mean massive boot, plenty of random storage all over the cabin, and very easy to drive in town for such a large car. Speaking of driving in town, let me show you the Passat's party trick feature. Automatic parking. How it works is, you find a space, pull up to it, stop obviously, and then switch your signal light on and press the button. Right now, I'm taking my hands off the wheel and the car is telling me move forward. And I moved forward. Now the display tells me to reverse. It's measured the space by itself, and now look. The car is doing the steering by itself. See? No hands. Only the throttle and brake. Look at that! And we're parked. Of course, you can debate for yourself how much utility or usefulness this will have in Sri Lankan parking conditions, but it's a nice thing to have to show off. Going down the road in the Passat, the first impression you get is how solid the whole car feels. There's massive amounts of sound insulation, so it's very quiet inside. The suspension is firm but never gets crashy, and it deals with Sri Lankan roads really well, never bothering you with the finer details, but at the same time smoothing everything out really nicely. Under the Passat's bonnet is VW's tried and tested 1.8 litre turbocharged 4-cylinder. In this application, it puts out 160 bhp and 250 Newton meters of torque. It's not a particularly outstanding engine in any way, shape or form, but it is very competent all around. 250 Newton meters of torque coming on from just 1500 rpm means that the Passat will always have an answer for any on-road acceleration demand. But the real technical highlight of this Passat is the gearbox. It's Volkswagen's DSG system and truly a staggering piece of engineering. It has twin clutches and the ability to pre-select and predict every gear that you're going to be in. What that means is that shift quality is unbelievable. Right now I'm in standard drive mode, and switching between each of its 7 gears is just completely imperceptible. When you're building speed, you absolutely cannot feel the shifts. Switching to sport mode, still the smoothness doesn't decrease, but the shift speed is just unbelievable. The gearbox by itself is so good that it makes the standard paddle shifters almost redundant. But if you really want to have manual control, you'll be pleased to know that this system reacts much quicker than any similar system on the market right now. The engine and gearbox together result in numbers of 0 to 100 km an hour in 8.5 seconds and a top speed of about 220 km per hour. From behind the wheel, you'd easily believe those numbers. In fact, the Passat feels even quicker than they suggest. So in a straight line, you don't have much to worry about. In the corners though, the news is less good. Clearly, VW's priority was to make a car that was comfortable and stable rather than something that could be flung around like a sports car. The steering is ultra light and doesn't really communicate much, and there is a noticeable amount of body roll when you're pushing into corners. Sure, you can take this car charging up a favorite mountain road, but everything about it says it would rather be cruising along the autobahn in silence than carving up the 18 bends. The mid-sized executive saloon market has some ultra-talented players at the moment, but the new Passat comes in with all guns blazing, building on the usual Volkswagen strengths of understated luxury, solid practicality and premium feel. If you're looking for a rock-solid autobahn-bred saloon that's also extremely understated, the Passat will fit you really well. Whoa, wait a minute. This isn't James Bond's car. Although Aston Martin and the MI6 agent are pretty synonymous. Other than that, Aston Martin is best known nowadays for producing ultra-expensive, ultra-flashy status symbols for the rich. Today though, we're going to go back a bit before that. Just after the Second World War, in fact, when the Aston Martin Motor Company was rescued from the brink of collapse by tractor magnate David Brown. He revitalized the company and set in motion a new line of products that would redefine what Aston Martin was all about. They were known as the DB Astons, and the very first model, the DB1 or Aston Martin 2-litre Sports as it was originally known, was really more of a test bed than a serious first attempt, with only 15 cars ever made. The real start came from the car you see here, the DB2. So while the DB2 may not be the very first Aston Martin, or even the very first David Brown manufactured Aston Martin, it can still be called the template by which all modern Astons spring from. A rear-wheel drive, 2-seat or 4-seat GT with a big engine up front. Only 411 DB2 Mark Is were ever produced, and we are incredibly fortunate to have one example in Sri Lanka. What you see here is that very car. The DB2 was introduced in 1950 and ran until 1953, when it was replaced by the similar looking but mechanically different DB2/4. In the 3 years it was made, certain aspects such as the grille were changed, and the range was extended with the introduction of a drop head version, of which 102 were built. Since Aston Martin was always interested in competition, DB2s found themselves on the track almost before they went on sale. The second, third and fourth DB2s ever built were entered into the 24 Hours of Le Mans in 1950 and immediately proved their mettle by finishing first and second in their class, while another example was driven to second in class at the very first race at Sebring in 1950. These results and more like them convinced David Brown to start a dedicated competition program, which went on to great success in the 50s and early 60s with purpose-built racing machines. Now, competition success shouldn't be a surprise because the DB2 really was a very advanced car for its time. The structure was a race-inspired tube frame with light alloy panels, the suspension was competition-focused, and the engine was designed by none other than W.O. Bentley. Yes, the same one who created Bentley motor cars that dominated the Le Mans races of the late 1920s and early 1930s. A 2.6-litre dual overhead cam 6-cylinder with twin SU carbs, this powerhouse of the times produced 105 bhp and hauled the lightweight DB6 to 100 km per hour in just 11.2 seconds and on to a maximum of 187 km per hour, which was electrifying stuff for 1950. The DB2 was not just a stripped-out competition car though. It was primarily intended to be a high-speed touring car for the wealthy, and as such was extremely well built and luxuriously finished with high-quality materials. However, from a modern perspective, 1950s luxury motoring has a few downsides. Getting in and out may be a process in itself, but look what happens once you finally do get in. I mean, look at where my legs are. Left knee is in the dashboard, right knee is also in the dashboard. And if you don't take care of it closing the door, as you saw earlier, it can be quite painful. The pedals are close set, but actually using your legs in a way that you can manipulate them is quite a challenge. The steering wheel is also pretty close to your chest. So apparently people back then were a lot thinner than they are now. In addition, there are no rear seats. The luggage space is accessible only through the inside of the cabin, and it has a level of heat soak from that big 6-cylinder that reminds you of a steam room. Of course, absolutely none of that matters when you're going down the road in this car, because it truly makes for a very special experience indeed. Sitting there with the big 6 burbling away, surrounded by all that leather and wood, and with those aircraft-style gauges in front of you, makes you feel like a 1950s British aristocrat heading down to your holiday villa on the French Riviera. This DB2 is the only example of a classic Aston Martin in Sri Lanka. It was first owned by Mr. Nihal Kanakaratne, director of the British Car Company, and Rowlands, who were the agents for many British car brands of yesteryear. Mr. Kanakaratne apparently purchased the car in 1953 and drove it overland to Sri Lanka, which, believe it or not, was fairly commonplace back then. Imagine doing the same thing today, impossible wouldn't even begin to describe it. After its early adventures, the car passed through a few hands and then fell into a state of disrepair, meeting with a front-end accident and being crudely lashed up with non-Aston Martin parts before being eventually laid up. That was the state in which current owner Hatim Akbar Ali found it, and of course under his ownership the car has undergone a meticulous ground-up restoration, with most of the key components being imported from the UK, right down to the original spec exhaust system. That attention to detail is evident in every line of the car as it is today and makes it stand out in any setting. All in all, it truly was a privilege to experience this wonderful machine and to be able to tell its story. And we should all be thankful that it is now in good hands that appreciate its true worth. James Bond may not have used one of these, but without it, his most famous ride would not exist.
And now on MoTorque, we bring you highlights from the Sigiriya Rallycross. SLH Race 1 saw Janaka Dias win the race from Damit Weerasinghe and Nadira Jinasena. Due to the number of entries in the SOGT event, the races were split into two, Moto 1 and Moto 2, with the top finishers in each race going through to the final round. Race 1 saw Passenger Pires return to the track. Also making his SOGT debut was Damit Weerasinghe. In Moto 2, despite setting the fastest time, Ashan Silva was given a 3-place grid penalty for removing his car from the paddocks too early the day before. Despite this, Ashan got an amazing amount of traction off the line and easily passed Dinesh Devagoda into the first turn. After this, he comfortably won the first race. The first race of the SLS category saw a dramatic accident for the third place driver. After this, the drivers had to negotiate the course with the added obstacle of the car still in the track. But still, despite this, a great battle developed for first and second, and third and fourth. At the front was Misika Naveen. He was constantly pressured by Kaushalya Samarasinghe, but sadly his car retired due to engine failure. In second place was Michael Wichesura, and in third place, Zakir Wahab. In the SLN category, Damit Weerasinghe managed to keep on to Rohitha Rajapaksa, who comfortably led the race from start to finish. In SLH Race 2, Damit Weerasinghe's bonnet flipped up and put him out of contention for the race win. It was then an easy win for Janaka Dias, followed by Lakma Wicharatna. In the truck and jeep event, it was a clear victory for Sanjay Senarat, who managed to bring his Mitsubishi Pajero Evo across the line in first position. SOGT saw a number of champions on the grid, including Ashan Silva, Pasandu Pires, Dinesh Devaragora, Aravinda Premadasa, and many more. All eyes were on the front, as Ashan shot into the lead after the second lap. Pasandu managed to keep up, but the straight line speed was no match for Ashan's. Another win then for Ashan, who has certainly got his 2014 campaign off to a flying start.